I want you all to think about the hardest language in the world to learn. Some of you may have remembered of maybe Arabic or Japanese, but I bet a big part of you would directly think of Chinese. Well, what would you say if I told you that Chinese is actually easy, or much easier than you think it is? And I'm telling you that out of my own experience. I started learning Chinese 1.5 years ago, and since then, I've been astonished by the extent to which the language is being misunderstood by most of non Chinese speakers because of the many stereotypes it's shrouded in. And with this brief overview of the language, its structure, writing, hope you will get a better understanding of how it actually works. Now, let's start with these, the characters, by far the most feared part of the Chinese language, uh, which, if you look at them like that, like bunch of random lines and squiggles, will definitely intimidate you and overwhelm you. But they're actually not that random. Even though there are thousands upon thousands of Chinese characters, they all consist of just 214 radicals or subunits, building blocks, which really help you when learning. Because as you're learning new characters and you familiarize yourself with more and more radicals, learning others is easier because the shapes that you are already familiar with come up. Now, but what are these radicals exactly that make this seemingly hard process so much easier? I have an example here of a radical in use in a language. So the radical here, it stands for tree, and I think you would agree it even looks like a tree. That's read as mu. Now, what do you think two radicals for tree like this would mean? Well, it means woods. And then three trees stacked upon each other like this, it means forest. Now, the simplicity of this, of how Chinese make up their words and even characters, doesn't stop there. It also goes on to the actual word formation. I have here, because the simplicity of the Chinese words, even though they're in general actually quite short, which is good news because they're quite easy to remember, they're mostly up to 3 syllables long, is not in their shortness, but the simplicity lies in how they're being constructed and put together. So for example, here we have the characters for electricity, 电, and speech, 话. Now, what do you think these two characters put together, 电话, would mean? Well, electrical speech, 电话, means a phone call. Now, what do you if we continue with the same logic, what do you think the character for fire, 火, and the character for mountain, 山, would mean together? So, fire mountain. Well, it means a volcano. And the simplicity of the grammar doesn't stop here too. Chinese Chinese, in comparison to the Western languages and Indo-European languages in particular, I'm sure you're familiar with these because English is also one of them, and you would be familiar also with the giant grammatical tables teaching you which verb tense to use with which pronoun in which verb tense. Well, in Chinese, there is none of this. You don't have to memorize any of this in Chinese. You won't see a single table in Chinese, grammatical table. Because in Chinese, there are no declinations, there are no articles, there are no plural forms. The verbs don't change at all. And I'm sure you're asking yourself right now, but how on earth does this language even function? And well, long story short, the answer lies in particle words. Particle words are these one syllable long, teeny tiny words that allow us, when added into the sentences, to give our sentences different grammatical meanings. To give you a better understanding, I've gathered up here 4 different sentences in both English and Chinese. I've colored the words with the same words in both languages, the same color, and the words that are purely for grammatical purposes in the sentences, I have left those I have left uncolored, so white, so that you have a better understanding of how much more grammatical input is needed in English than in Chinese to make sense of the sentences. Now, the first sentence is the most simple grammatical sentence I think you could construct. So she eats an apple. She eats an apple. Now, in English, to make up this sentence, you need to know that the verb eat in the third person form needs to have s in the end, and you have to make sense of the whole articles, the whole concept of articles and how they're used. You have to know that you have to apply the article a here, and that since the word apple starts with a vowel, you have to turn it to an N. Now, in Chinese, there is no grammar in this sentence at all. You just stuck these words upon each other. So this same sentence in Chinese would be 他吃苹果, which is directly translated just she eat apple, and that is a fully correct sentence. Now, if we make it a bit harder and put it into a different tense, so the past tense, for example, in English, it would be she ate an apple, right? Now, in English, you introduce a completely new form of the verb eat, which you had to memorize, ate, and then the same thing with the articles stays. In Chinese, the only thing you do, which also applies to every single verb, if you want to put it into the past tense, you just add the particle le to the end of the sentence, to the end of the verb. So the same sentence in Chinese would be 她吃了苹果, so she ate an apple, and we just add le to the end of the verb 吃. Now, the next sentence we have is having done something. So she has eaten an apple. Here we have to introduce a completely new verb. So the auxiliary verb, as it's called, which doesn't really have to do anything with the actual with the actual act of eating something, but is rather there just for grammatical purposes. You have to put it into the right form, has, and then you introduce again a completely new form of the verb eat, eaten, which the learner had to memorize too. And the article concept applies here again. But in Chinese, the only thing you actually do is just add the particle word 过, which stands for having done something. So the same sentence in Chinese is 他吃过苹果. And let's move on to the last sentence, which is in the question form. So we are asking a question: does she eat an apple? Does she eat apples? And in English, here we introduce again a completely new verb just for grammatical purposes, which we have to put in the right correct form. So do becomes does, and we have to put it in the beginning of the sentence. And then we change the word apple from its to its plural form, so we add the ending s. As I told you, in Chinese, there are no plural forms, so you don't change the word 苹果, apple, at all. And the only thing you do to give the listener, to make the listener understand that you are asking a question, is just add the particle ma to the end of the sentence, which stands for questions. So the same sentence in Chinese would be 他吃苹果吗? Now, many people say that Chinese and in general tonal languages are hard for speakers of European and Middle Eastern languages because those languages don't have tones. But are you really sure you don't use tones every day? Well, don't keep yourself busy asking what, because I'll assure you, you actually do use tones every day. You see what I did there? I used 3 of the 4 Chinese tones in just 3 English sentences. Now, to give you a better understanding of how the tones actually work and what these tones are, let's look at the graph here. So the first tone in the Chinese language, it's called the flat tone. So MA, the syllable MA here would be read as ma, ma. My voice stays the same. Now, if we move on to the second tone, that's the rising tone. So here, the same syllable would be pronounced as ma, ma, as in when we ask questions in English or Western languages, like what? And then the fourth tone, it's the falling tone. So it's ma, like when we say yes, no. That's the fourth tone. Now, I know that you would have noticed that I missed the third tone, and that was intentional because that's the only tone I couldn't really find the direct correlation in English with. But it's not really that hard if you know the third and the fourth tones. It's basically the falling and then the rising tone. So the same syllable here would be ma, ma. You see, my voice, it goes down and then goes up again. And I'm sure that this is not that easy. It was not in the beginning. It was not that easy for me either. So in the beginning, me speaking Chinese, I used to, when speaking Chinese, I used to move my hands along with the tones in my head. So me speaking Chinese back then would look like something, 感谢诸位的时间. But now I can just say, 感谢诸位的时间, which by the way means thank you for your attention. So thank you all for your attention.